Welcome to the Galactic Core Podcast. Here to review the latest films and TV shows from all your favorite intergalactic universes. Now, it's time to get your geek on. Please welcome your host, the prophesized chosen one. It's Andy.
Welcome in to another episode of the Galactic Core Podcast. I am definitely your host, Andy, and this is definitely the Galactic Core Podcast. We've got some new equipment, so we may sound a little different, but don't let that fool you. You're crazy. You must feel so silly right now. So here with me today is 1/3 of the wonderful and super handsome Why So Sidious podcast, friend of the show. Thanks for coming on, Caleb.
Thanks for having me, Andy. I really appreciate it. It hasn't been too long. I was on the show pretty recently, so your audience is pretty familiar.
Yeah, we just had you on here to cover The Acolyte and the Boys, I believe episode 4 or 5? Episode 5, yeah. So that's a recent episode. It's a good one. Make sure you check it out. Today, we are going to be getting into the season of Tolkien. J.R.R. Tolkien. Sorry. Rings of Power, Season 2, American accent and all. I mean, British accent. Rings of Power Season 2. Tis the reason for the season, dropping just around the corner, and we here at the Galactic Core Podcast are eager for it to come. After that, we'll be briefly jumping into the next couple of Tolkien projects on the horizon, The War of the Rohirrim and The Hunt for Gollum. We'll touch on what we know about the projects, our expectations on what we should expect, and more. So before we get into that, be sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Twitch, and YouTube at the Galactic Core Podcast. You can find links in the episode description. And while you're at it, check out our recent episodes out on the Galactic Core Podcast, where we cover Season 4 of The Boys and Season 1 of The Acolyte. Like we just said, our friend Caleb here is on one of the episodes. Of course, Lee from Lights Camera Rant is on one of the recent episodes covering it. So be sure to go listen to it if you haven't.
And didn't you, Andy, go over to Clam Brandalorian for an Acolyte episode?
Yes, I definitely did. I went over there to Clam Brandalorian and did an Acolyte episode. That's out there too, so be sure to check that out. Caleb, what's the Why So Sidious crew been up to lately?
We've been covering the same shows as this wonderful podcast, along with House of the Dragon. So we have been very busy as well, and we are looking forward to Deadpool 3, which comes out next week. Ooh. Or I don't know when this podcast drops, but it might be out already. But yeah, we've been busy having a good time. JD's over there doing the comic reviews on TikTok and bringing some TikTok guests onto our show to review more comics.
Oh, very nice. Sounds like you got a solid crew working over there. So, all right, let's get right into it. Before we do, I do believe that the Galactic Core Podcast audience is a sharp one. I mean, they do listen to the Galactic Core Podcast, so that's a plus already. True. I'm sure you figured me out. It's actually not Andy. I'm sorry that I had to deceive you, but it was a matter of national security. I had no choice. So it is me. It's David from the Why So Sidious podcast. You may have seen me in other projects, such as the Galactic Core Podcast May the 4th Celebration and the coverage of Godzilla -1. Your fearless host, Andy, is busy taking care of the heir to the Galactic Core, and so we stepped in to lighten the load and keep his listeners satisfied while he tends to the little one. So, if you're hearing this on our feed, congratulations. You're now a new listener of the Galactic Core Podcast, if you already weren't. All right, so let's get down to it. The Rings of Power brought on a lot of criticism in its first season. It dropped on Amazon. A lot of praise, too. But a lot of criticism. It was pretty divisive. There was a lot of Tolkien truthers very angry about it, with outrage similar to The Acolyte going on right now in some ways. It had $1 billion budget. It only had partial rights to the Tolkien tale. The Rings of Power brought us a beautifully shot season of television, in my opinion. But it did include some changes that fans did not appreciate. So even though we know going in, they had limited rights, but it doesn't matter to some. They could not use the Silmarillion, only the appendices and anything written in the Lord of the Rings books were a whole age in the future. So there wasn't a ton that they were technically allowed to use for the second age they brought to us. So it gets ripped on social media. It says it's a disgrace to Tolkien and his works. I don't agree at all. I'm a big Tolkien fan, read all the books, seen the movies. It's my favorite IP in all of fandom, over Star Wars, Marvel, DC, even Game of Thrones. I mean, it's at the top. So I thoroughly enjoyed it. I do get some of the complaints, But man, it got similar reactions to The Acolyte from Star Wars fans, and I don't get it. And so maybe it had me thinking, like, maybe this is how people who love The Acolyte feel right now, that are like,
right,
I loved it. I don't know why you hate it so much. I thought this was cool, and that was because that's how I felt about Rings of Power, and I always got, pushback on it about how good it was. It was garbage, yada yada. So yeah, I mean, I guess, I don't know. The majority of the outrage with Rings of Power was lore change, though. It wasn't exactly quality. Acolyte had a bit more breadth of complaints there, but it was one of them. So, Caleb, what say you? What were your thoughts on the first season of the show?
Well, I'm not a big Tolkien truther. I have not read the books, just watched the movies. But I guess that makes me a novice nerd on this subject. But no, I really enjoyed the first season. I think it was a very well told story. And I mean, I do get some of the gripes where maybe they're trying to do too much with having like every character that could be alive during this time from the original trilogy, with like, the stranger maybe being Gandalf, that whole thing. Like, that might be a little bit too much because you already have Galadriel and Elrond and Sauron. Like, they're telling the story of basically the intro to the first movie, The Fellowship of the Ring. I feel like that's what this whole show is leading towards.
Yeah. No, absolutely. But I think I was surprised at the kind of across the board acceptance that we had on our podcast when we covered it. We all, at the very end of it, we had some high regards for it and rated it pretty high. Mm-hmm. All high 8s, low 9s. So this show hit for our podcast for sure. And yeah, I thought it was beautiful cinematography, some awesome action, creative and unique changes that, again, had to be made. They didn't have the rights to certain things, so they made some changes, and I thought for the most part they were cool. I loved Elrond and Durin so much, their relationship, like, so well written. Got me emotional a couple times. So they did well with their character pairings. Galadriel and Halbrand, I enjoyed a lot of their scenes in the early parts of the season. And just seeing orcs in Middle-earth again, I think if they messed up with the orcs and their looks, it would have taken the show off or show down a peg. But they nailed the orcs. Their dialogue, costume, makeup design, like, they looked great in it.
They're scary.
So, yeah, like,
those
they did a really good job.
Eyes.
Dude, yeah, Mordor orcs are terrifying. And Adar was a terrific original character created for the show, played beautifully by Joseph Malles. I don't know if that's how you pronounce that. Engaging, interesting character, mystery and darkness to him, but like still that side that craves the warmth of the sunlight and the soul of the earth. Like, you can tell he's conflicted, and it's such an interesting character. You want to learn his background. And it hurts because Joseph is not returning for the role. Adar has been recast for season 2. He's now played by a guy named Sam Hazeldine. He's been in The Witcher, Peaky Blinders, The Sandman show on Netflix, Masters of the Air, The Last Duel. He's been in a ton of stuff, but I'm not super familiar with him, so I think he's just got a lot of small roles. So we'll see how he takes over, but I loved Adar in season 1.
Yeah. Benjen, he'll be missed.
Yeah. Benjen, what was his name in the later seasons after he goes north of the wall?
Cold Hands.
Cold Hands, there it is. Look at that. Look at that.
There it is.
Sorry,
right
Andy. I promised I wouldn't cover House of the Dragon on here as a topic, but it's just going to get mentioned sometimes.
It's going to.
Go check out House of the Dragon, airing on Sundays.
Yeah, he was a really cool character, though, and how he cares for the orcs. Like, they're children of his own, which was a super unique way of seeing things. Like, most time they're just, in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, they're just cannon fodder that Saruman creates out of the ground to just be soldiers to die and win this war. And with Adar, he does care about every single one of them. He says, they all have names, they all have hearts. Like, so I did really like that aspect.
Yeah, it was a unique character. We've never seen somebody actually care for orcs like that. Like Saruman was using them. He definitely didn't care about them whatsoever. So it was again, and we learn, that he's the first orc. I forgot what they called him.
Udur.
Huh? Well,
Udur?
No, he liked Uruk is what they wanted to be called, which is orc in black speech, I think, or I don't know what it is. But no, Galadriel was calling him something else, some term for the first orc ever, the first elf that were twisted by the darkness and turned into orcs, which is a crazy backstory to how orcs were created. So that was cool, getting a taste of that, and I don't know, there was a lot of cool, unique stuff in this show. So before we keep praising it, what I wanted to do is touch on some of the major gripes that was kind of like internet wide. Like these were the biggest issues people had and why they didn't like the show, and kind of see if we agree and disagree on it. So we'll start off with the use of Sauron. So a lot of people didn't like the change that made him human rather than elf. He was never in human form. Okay. And they made him Halbrand. He was an elf form named Anatar, which we'll get into that later. And they also didn't. Yeah, well, and certain events that happened with Anatar and Celebrimbor lead into stuff we're seeing in season 2 there. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see. And we did get that elf figure in the trailer, didn't we?
It was the same actor as a blonde-haired elf.
That's right. So yeah, we're going to be seeing Anatar in there, which will be interesting. And other people had complaints that they didn't like the mystery reveal. They thought that Sauron should have been one of the main characters and should have been something like where the audience knows it's him, but the characters in the show don't know that it's him. And so it could have fleshed out more of what his plan was at point. So it's just a take on style really there. I don't think that's because I still think the way they did it was cool too. I mean, that would have been a cool way too, but I don't think that lessened the show. Yeah.
And it's only season 1. If he's going to be in this elf form in season 2, I'm sure he's going to. Now we know he's Sauron, but the people he's with won't know he's Sauron. So we will have that aspect in these future seasons.
Yeah, I think we will get some of that, and I get it to an extent because part of that complaint was you're missing a major antagonist for the season as a whole. Like there's not an overarching villain, which I kind of think Adar was. You know, he got defeated episode 6, but still. I think he was that villain until Halbrand exposed himself, and then it shifted over. But I don't know. Yeah, I didn't mind that much. Another big complaint is something we really liked, which is the portrayal of Galadriel. It's a pretty drastic change from the book. Galadriel was, a fierce warrior in this, headstrong, very stubborn, very emotional. And in the book, Galadriel was much different, like even-keeled, the wisest of the wise, almost like a perfect being, very static. But I enjoyed this interpretation more. I think this is more entertaining, first off, rather than watching a perfect being float through stuff. And she can still become that by the third age. Like, she lives for thousands of years. You're going to change over time. She's going to go through certain events and awakenings, and she can easily become that peaceful, wise being that we meet in Lord of the Rings while going through this stage in her life where she's getting out this rage and, she has this need for vengeance for her brother and all this stuff. So, I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed her through this season, but a lot of people did not like Galadriel.
Yeah, that's odd. I mean, I guess it's just they want everything to be the same as the book, but... Yeah, it's just a more entertaining character, a more complex, fleshed out character when she has like all these past traumas that she's digging through and no one believes that Sauron's still there. She's the only one, and it's kind of her whole goal of the whole season to prove everyone wrong.
Yeah. Which is kind of messed up. We find out later Gil-galad knew that there was a darkness spreading over the land, and he sent her back to Valinor anyways, which I don't think I remember catching on the first time around. And then he tells Elrond, he's like, yeah, everything's dying. There's a darkness, and it's going to come and take out. It was like, wait, what? You knew that? Like, it's not cool?
He mentioned the Mount Doom, though. Did Mount Doom start that, or was it before that?
No, it was before that. That was before Mount Doom erupted, and yeah, that was early in the season they were talking about it. So, yeah. Which leads naturally into another complaint, which is Gil-galad's portrayal. But especially Silmarillion book readers really hated this because the High King Gil-galad in the books was like a really honorable and respectable character, like that you thought highly of. Like he was like, all right, this dude is good. Like I will follow this dude into battle. I will do what this dude kind of like. He was an easy to like character, and he definitely wasn't in the show. I think by the end of it, he was a little better, but there was definitely parts where he's like, he's guilt tripping Elrond into breaking his oath, and he's kind of being a dick here and there with Galadriel, and he just didn't come off super likable when that's like everybody loves High King Gil-galad in the books kind of deal. So a lot of people thought he got done dirty. And I can see this one. I wasn't a fan of his character for the most part in the season, so I didn't think he was that cool of a character.
But, yeah, I could agree with that.
Yeah.
But I didn't know his character from the book, so I thought he was interesting because he was still slightly honorable, where he was trying to avoid war, I think, and just trying to take like the easier, more peaceful path. to say to save the greater good.
Right. Just didn't want his people dying, but yeah. Another issue is the appearance of the elves, which I'm going to hold off on that one. We'll get into it a little bit later because we've got some personal gripes, but that's on one of my main gripes too, actually. So we'll get into that later, but I do agree with it to an extent. All right, and then real quick, we got just a few more. The inclusion of Gandalf, or who we assume it to be. People thought it was unnecessary, which I agreed with, but two, because it blatantly changes the lore of Gandalf, as he and Sauron did not arrive until the Third Age. In wizard form, there's a lot of discrepancies, so it just kind of felt unnecessary to a lot of people, and almost like hey, here's Baby Yoda, like, hey, here's this character, throw him in there to bring people in, kind of a cheap move. Which again, that's something else I get into, but I can see that complaint too, and I know we all in the podcast weren't crazy about it at points, and I think by the end of it we were kind of good with it though. How did you end up feeling about that?
I feel like I accepted it by the end, like, all right, I can get it, but with Amazon just has the rights to this age, right? So if someone from I don't know, the Embracer Group or whoever has the rights to that other stuff, other parts of the Lord of the Rings, if they want to do like a Gandalf origin story set when he arrives, in the Third Age, it's going to be conflicting with Rings of Power now. Things can get messy this way if they change too much.
Right. It feels like Rings of Power is almost like an Elseworlds kind of project because they don't have all the rights. But I don't know. I don't know if Peter Jackson had the rights to the Silmarillion. I think maybe he only had the rights to the books too. I don't know what the rights, but again, that's fair. That's fine though when you're working in that age that you have the rights to. When you only have the rights to an age you're not working on it, it's a little bit more difficult. So, anyways, that's the Gandalf thing. And I will just say, I was going to say it for later. I'll just say it now. Yeah, I didn't like it at all when it first came out. And then by the end of the season, I was like, all right, I can work with this. This is fine. And then coming back to it, I'm back to, no, I don't like this anymore. He doesn't age, so he shouldn't look younger. And I found myself on the rewatch having no interest in the scenes with him, as him and Dory work out how to communicate, and he has his freakouts. It's like the low points of the season for me. And I don't know what to expect from next season, so I'm back to not liking it. So that's one of my issues.
I do like that him and... What's her name? Lori?
Dory, I think. I don't even know. I think it's Dory, though.
Go off by themselves. So it's just going to be the two of them in season 2, I'm imagining, and they'll kind of leave the tribe behind. So it could be less...
Oh, that's right.
Annoying or uninteresting.
Yeah, you're right. And it's Nori with an N, my bad.
Nori. That's
Nori.
Right. That's what I said.
Yeah. We all said that. It's just your audio, again, is messed up to you out there listening. Again, this is Andy. I don't know what you're talking about. So, and then multiple Durins. So in the book, kind of the point of being named Durin is the legacy of Durin. Like the original Durin is like kind of a god to dwarves, and there was never two alive at one time because the whole lore behind it was every new Durin was a reincarnation of the previous one. So they did break that. Obviously, the dad and the son in this are both named Durin, but I guess I just didn't care that much. I get that one, but I don't care personally.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like a dwarf king would name his son after him.
Yeah. It's whatever. But I do get that there is a whole mythos to Durin and the reincarnation, so it did seem, but whatever. Costume design for wow, $5. Costume design for Numenor. A lot of people said this is a $1 billion show, and Numenor is supposed to be like at the peak of one of the strongest kingdoms in the world. And they said a lot of the costume design looked cheap and cosplayish, especially the sailors, like when they're in their sailor attire and almost kind of have like thermals on underneath, like a kind of cardboard looking chest plate. So people thought that they did really weak with that. I will say it wasn't on the level of Game of Thrones, but I think when they got armored up for battle and they rode to Middle Earth and sailed with Galadriel, I thought their armor looked clean. Like
Dude,
the white,
I was gonna say that.
The white hair coming out of the helmet, like I thought they looked clean. But I can agree to the sailor. What's that?
Like the white scales of their armor. It looked so clean.
Dude, they look dope. Galadriel's armor looked dope in that scene. Halbrand's all the armor looked like, okay, that looks like Game of Thrones level. Before earlier episodes, I agreed. The sailor stuff, it looked pretty cheap, but yeah, I'll take. I think they made up for it by the end of the season. So,
Agreed.
and then last thing, Mordor creation. Morgoth created Mordor in the First Age. Sauron would choose it about 1,000 years later and make it a stronghold due to the geography of it and its defenses and mountain ranges. So that was a big change. It got created in the show by an old human who stabbed a key into a thing and kind of created this Rube Goldberg chain of type of system that ended up making the volcano erupt. So I think Morgoth creating it in the First Age is way cooler. But I'd be lying if I wasn't, when I first watched it and that happened, I wasn't like, oh, it's Mount Doom. Like, I was stoked on it.
Right.
But
Yeah, that's kind of the thing I talked about where they might be trying to do too much. Where, you know,
Right.
let's show the origin of everything from the movies. Like, we don't... It's
how
like
Gandalf
Solo.
get his hat? Like,
It's like the
I
Solo
don't care.
movie.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, how'd he get that vest? He found it. Oh, I don't feel any different.
Right.
Yeah, so, and I get that, and I get the PowerPoint style shift from the title The Southlands to Mordor when it burned away. I thought that was kind of corny. I thought that felt like it would have been cooler to leave it as, like, just let the audience see it and be like, oh, that's Mordor. That's sick. And they did yeah.
Or just don't put the Southlands up. Leave it blank and then just go Mordor. And just
Right.
put Mordor up there instead of switching it.
Yeah. Yeah, the burn away PowerPoint effect was kind of goofy. It was like, that's not $1 billion budget kind of thing I just watched. But anyways, so those are the major issues out there. And I just want to address these gripes real quick. Tolkien was famous for changing canon when he would go back and write a new story or something. Or like he'd add things or additions to previous things. He was known to write what fit the story and what he felt at that time. So there were multiple times in Tolkien's own writing where he changed or broke his own canon. So the whole respect Tolkien thing is kind of like, you're not trying to defend Tolkien. He changed a ton of stuff too, first off. But
And how many scenes does a woman talk to another woman in the entire trilogy? I think, what is it, one scene where the mom's talking to the daughter, she says, like, go run and hide or something, and that's like the only thing.
I think if you count Legolas as a woman, he might have talked to Arwen at one point or Eowyn at one point. But yeah.
So
yeah, and you know, and then this was funny. So this is something I've seen a lot of people say. Even my oldest brother made mention of this. So when the trilogy came out, well before social media, early 2000s, wasn't as big of a platform for a complaint, but there were apparently a lot of backlash on the nerd forums online during that time.
Say forums, that's where you went, the dark web.
The forums, dude. There was a lot of backlash. People who claimed to be real Tolkien fans ripped people for praising it because so many things were changed. Faramir was being changed from his book character. The casting of Aragorn, because he wasn't tall enough and burly. Like, they didn't like Viggo's casting. There weren't enough elves in the trilogy. Tom Bombadil being removed, which was a great call. No offense, but and people said like it was a disgrace, and it went on becoming the greatest movie trilogy ever. So I'm not saying Rings of Power is going to be the greatest series ever, but I'm just saying there's always going to be that group who are pissed about certain changes. And I think if the changes make sense and the quality is still at a high level, I'm good with it. So just a reminder out there, people didn't like Lord of the Rings to an extent. There was that crowd out there, so maybe lighten up, see what they bring us for season 2. All right, so let's get into positives. Let's get into some positive. Let's do our top 5 moments from season 1. Let's both... I mean, I've got a good amount of OLIs. I don't know if you do or not.
I just did a straight 5.
Oh, shit. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, all right, we can do our straight 5, and then whatever in my OLIs left off, I'm going to shout out real quick. But all right, mine's not even necessarily number 5 to number 1. It's just kind of top 5 in general. Mm-hmm. I have one that's at the top, but that's about it. So,
right.
Start us off. What's one of your top 5?
I have kind of a smaller one. I want to do like everything super obvious. I liked Galadriel training the Númenórean troops. When it's like Isildur and his 2 friends, and she's like, you know, whoever touches me gets to be a captain. I forgot what she says, and then
Lieutenant.
She's just like dodging all his shots without even fighting back, and then just one parry to the neck stops them. Like, and then you see Elendil, is that Isildur's dad?
Yeah.
He just like gives that smirk, like, damn, like, because he's like the one person who actually likes elves.
Right.
So he's like,
Respects them.
this. Yeah, he can just tell she's on a whole nother level, and that's where we see that, like, these people need to start respecting elves again because they do good when they work together.
Right, and you're about to go fight some orc, so you better pay attention to what she knows because you've never seen an orc before. Like, it's a totally different. Yeah, it was cool how she was telling them, power isn't the way. Like, there was a lot of cool little moments in that scene. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I'll throw out one of mine. Seeing Khazad-dûm in all its glory at its peak. This was freaking awesome to see. I mean, even in the trilogy, the awe-inspiring sights we saw when it was nothing but death and shadow in there, but still, like, the massiveness of it, you could catch glimpses of the halls, and it was like, wow, this must have looked amazing when it was at its peak. And we got to see it. We got to see waterfalls flowing through, life and light throughout it. It was just a treat, and Bear McCreary, the composer, did a solid job with the score during this scene. So I freaking loved seeing Khazad-dûm like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because in the trilogy, it's all in ruins.
Right. What do you got?
I'm gonna put Arondir attempted to escape from the orcs when they're basically like slaves with all the chains, and they plan an escape where they're gonna, try and take out as many orcs and then run away and hopefully get away. And then they unleash that dog too. That, like, I forgot what they called it.
They called it a warg, so it was supposed to be the same type of animal we saw in the Two Towers when they're traveling to Helm's Deep, and Aragorn gets taken off the cliff fighting one of them. Mm-hmm. They looked a lot different, obviously, but
right. And just and then when Arondir thinks he's gonna escape, and he climbs up to the top, and his friend's over there running away, and then his friend just like stands still and turns around. There's like an arrow in his heart, and it's like, oh shit! And then he just gets pulled back down. I was like, damn. But it was a really, like, intense scene.
Yeah, that was brutal. I definitely thought he was making it out of there, and not so much. It was a solid scene though. It was some cool uses of slow mo. The way they used the chains as weapons through a lot of the stuff. So it was a cool creative scene. So that was in my top 5 too. The elves escaping. So I'll throw that out there. Another one I got, I'll stick with the dwarves, is Elrond and Durin reuniting. When Elrond shows up for the first time and they're riding the elevator, and he realizes, like, how much his missed time affected Durin, where Durin's like, 20 years might be a blink of an eye in your life, but, like, I had a ton of stuff happen. Like, things changed. You missed everything. You missed my wedding, my kids. Like, you've been gone, bro. This is not cool. And you can see Elrond kind of, like, realizing where he's coming from. And I just thought it was acted very well, written very well. I felt sad for both of them and happy at the end of it when they made up. And oh gosh, what's Durin's wife's name? Desi.
That sounds right.
It's close to that. But her being stoked that Elrond's there, and Durin's trying not to, like, be happy, and she's like, oh dude, he planted that tree that you gave him, and he acts like it's one of his kids, like he's so fond. So it was just, I just loved it, bro. I thought it was a really heartwarming kind of cool relationship between the two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, Durin's probably one of my favorite characters, and how he just sticks up for Elrond in front of his dad and everyone.
Yeah.
Like, he says, like, he's a brother to me, like he was, fired in my mother's womb.
Yeah.
So yeah, they have a great relationship.
Can't say that stuff to a Balon Greyjoy. He will smack you around and you try to call somebody like that your brother.
Right? Uh-oh, another Game of Thrones reference.
Sorry, Andy. She spills out. Yeah, what do you got?
I know we talked about it as one of the gripes, but I do have the eruption of Mount Doom in my top 5. Because I didn't know that. Like I said, I haven't read the book, and it is just like a really, like, awe-inspiring scene where, the water goes down, it's crashing, it's exploding through the wells in the little town they're in.
Yeah.
And then you see how all the water starts falling down into the lava, creating this, like, giant explosion. And so I did like it, and it's a cool scene to see because it does set things up.
Yeah. No, I agree. I don't shame you for that one at all. Again, like I said, when I watched it, I thought it was dope. Honestly, I didn't know that Morgoth created it in the first age until after I saw that scene when people were complaining. So when I watched it, I was just like, that was pretty sick. Like, And the VFX for the explosion and the pyroclastic flow flowing all over, like that looked great. I do have a gripe from that, but I'll get to that later. Yeah.
And then like the meteors crashing down, and like you see someone standing right behind Galadriel and just gets fucking squashed.
Toasted. Just toasted. Like, no, the VFX was great. It was a fun scene to watch for sure. So and scary. Like imagining being there after you think you just won this battle, and all of a sudden you're just like wild. So yeah, I don't blame you for having that one.
And R.I.P. Isildur too.
Yeah. Well, yeah. We all thought he was dead. I can't believe that he's going to be in season 2. All right, so my top 2 are actually my top 2 that I'm going to read off now. So one of them is Halbrand riding out in his armor for the first time. We already talked about this, but followed by the fully armored Numenor soldiers loading onto the boats in their white armor, looking clean as hell, and followed by Galadriel stepping aboard with the epic score. They sail off to Middle-earth, and it's just a really cool scene that brings that like classic epic fantasy feel. So it was an awesome end to the episode, and it just gets you stoked for what's coming up next. So, but I just rewatched that scene, and I was like, it just brings that. I think I said it already, but just it makes you feel like you're living in a fantasy epic when you're watching that, and the score is great. It's just awesome scene.
You love a good build up for a battle.
I love it. Love it.
Yeah, 2 more for me. I'm gonna do the Battle of the Southlands. So when all the orcs go up to the tower, and Arondir, smashes the tower down. Then they meet in the city the little village where they're hiding out, and they win the battle. But then they start to pull the helmets off, and they realize they sent all the villagers who turned on them. And it's like, oh, shit. And then the orcs are there, and it's like, we have no chance now. They try to run inside. Adar starts killing people.
That was brutal.
That was stabs that one people right through the stomach, like. And then dumbass Theo gives him the little dagger. Of course, did not like that kid in the rewatch as well.
Sucks.
But then Numenor shows up last minute, and it's kind of like a mini Ride of the Rohirrim kind of thing.
They tried. They for sure had that in mind while making that scene, like.
But not as epic, of course. But still, a very good back and forth battle. And that whole episode 6, is just that. It doesn't go anywhere else.
Yeah, it's just that lead up, and then I think they get there like halfway through the episode or something. Because then, at the same in that episode is the eruption of Mount Doom. So, which is why that was our across the board overall highest rated episode on our podcast over there. I think Caleb had a 9.3. I think JD had a 9.2, and I had a 9.1 or something like that. We all had it above 9 though. So great episode, and that's also my number 1 in the top 2. Is that it's just epic, beautiful cinematography. The score is awesome, which I realized on this rewatch. Like Bear McCreary killed the score. There were a lot of scenes where it was like, oh, this is made better because of the music right now. So. And we got some brutal orc kills. Galadriel cut some of them into pieces on some of those slices, and was an absolute badass in that scene. So, and it ended with the crazy horse chase after Adar, and Halbrand being do you remember me? Followed right after by Adar saying like how he killed Sauron, and so it was just a whole 20-minute stretch of awesomeness. So,
right,
yeah. All right,
my number 1.
Oh, yeah, my bad. You still got one more. What do you got?
The Forging of the Elven Rings / the Sauron reveal. So I kind of got both of them tied into one, because it all happens at the same time. But just because we finally get to that moment we've been waiting for, like, okay, this show is about the Rings of Power. We're going to get the 3 for the elves and the 7 for the dwarves. So it was just a super cool moment leading up to it, where they figure out, Halbrand's helping them out. We need to, reverse engineer this, do it in a different way. And then even Galadriel gives her dead brother's dagger that he gave her, right before he died.
Oh, I forgot about that.
She's been keeping it for all these years, and now she has to melt it down. But sacrifices must be made. And they're beautiful rings, like the red, the blue, and then they have like the silver with the diamond on it. Like,
right.
Cool rings.
Yeah, I wish I got to. So when I rewatched this to prep for this episode, I only made it to episode 6. So I've not watched episode 7 and 8 yet, which is the Forging of the Rings, and it's the reveal of Halbrand, and episode 7 is like the aftermath of the volcano and everything. But
Yeah.
so I wish I got to rewatch those scenes. That did make my OLI, the crafting and the Halbrand reveal where it's Sauron on the raft in the ocean, where it does like the little 180 camera angle, and it was pretty sick.
That was the combo they were having on that little boat too, where he's basically saying like, "You can save me from the light if we, join forces, or save me from the darkness if we join forces." Like,
right.
And she's like, "Do you want to save the world or rule it?" And he's like, "I see no difference."
Yeah, that
And
was
it's a really cool scene.
nail in
And
the
then
coffin.
that's when it pans over and it's Sauron standing next to her, and they're like holding hands. Like, it would have been
I'm
sick,
sick.
dude. Sauron and Galadriel, that's a combo.
Oh, that's a scary ass combo. I just think of the Galadriel and the Fellowship when Frodo offers her the ring.
Where's
You would
JD?
get a queen. It's just we need JD here to reenact that scene. But yeah, she is terrifying when you have power brought in front of her. So glad we didn't have to revisit that. But so I'll throw out some OLIs real quick. I was not as disciplined at a lot, so I'm not going to dive into any of them, but I just will throw them out. That was one of my reveals, or the Sauron reveal was one of them. The intro to Numenor, just the score and shots of the city when we first sail into there and we're seeing these wide shots of the city. I thought they did a really good job of showing that. As far as intros go, a few intros. The opening score. So shout out to Howard Shore, the composer from the trilogy. He's the one who actually composed the score. Barry McCreary did everything else, but Howard Shore came back for that opening title, which I thought was great. Just sounded awesome. And then the other opening sequence that I like was Galadriel leading the elves through the snow. We get the kind of like what she's motivated to do. She kills the ice troll. We see how insanely determined she is, so that was cool. The prologue did a solid job at bringing us back to Middle Earth and like the world of the Lord of the Rings as an audience and setting the tone. But I will say on my second watch, I didn't like it as much as I did the first time. But it was still cool. Galadriel talking trash to Adar about how she's going to leave him alive and kill every single orc left living, so he has to watch all of his children. That was intense, bro.
She's crazy.
He's like, oh, I guess I'm the only elf alive, if not the only elf alive who's been transformed by darkness. Like, yeah, that was dark.
Yeah, very dark side.
And then shout out to the orc burrowing under the home scene. That was a very unique sequence. It was kind of horror vibes. We didn't know if he was even an orc for a while. Like, Theo's like, those mice are scratching and scraping all night, and then we find out, no, that's the sound of an orc burrowing under their house, and they eventually bust through the floorboards, and we get that crazy kind of scene with Theo hiding in the closet. I thought it was just a really unique kind of entry into a Lord of the Rings thing, which wasn't typical, and it was pretty cool. So, but yeah, those are my OLIs.
Besides the Bilbo Baggins jump scare.
Yes.
That's the other.
Yes, that one was scarier, but this one was close. Okay, we hyped it up a good amount. We talked about other people's issues. Caleb, what were some issues you had with the show that stood out to you?
I mean, wasn't a big fan of the Harfoots. It just wasn't down my alley, and it just seemed a little. It was just a different genre of television, or from any other story they were telling. Like the Elrond and Durin stuff was dope. Galadriel was dope. Arendir was dope, but then it would go to Harfoots, and it's like, this seems like it's a totally different series. You know what I mean? Like they're going somewhere else for this. So
yeah.
I wasn't a fan of that. And the Gandalf thing was definitely something I had to bite on to accept. Mm-hmm. But I didn't have a ton of issues, honestly. Like,
I like it. Oh yeah, I love to hear that, man. I'm all about it. I guess I had more. I agree with you on the Harfoots. I could totally go without them. I will say their introduction in episode 1 was pretty creative when it first reveals that it's them hiding under the brush and all like that. I thought that was creative, and it was like a believable nomadic ancestor of the hobbits. But after that, man, I was skipping scenes on the rewatch. I just had no interest in them. I just kept finding myself waiting for it to switch, and then realized I've seen this before. I can just skip ahead in like 3 minutes, and so it's definitely the weak point of the series. Theo,
Oh, yeah,
Just Theo in general. He just sucked in every scene he was in. Awful character. Don't like him. Like, get that kid out of here. Talked about Gandalf already. Talked about the Mordor PowerPoint presentation deal, and those are all, well, the Mordor thing's a nitpick. The elves' appearance, mentioned that earlier. I will say, a lot of people had a problem with it. It didn't ruin it for me, but it is a nitpick of mine. I do wish at least some of the male elves had like long hair and looked like we've seen in prior
iterations,
appearances, and in the books how they're described. You know, I don't know. We had like one elf who had long hair, and it was Gilgalad, I think, but everybody else had the short, different hairstyle. I don't know. It wasn't horrible. It didn't take me out, but I do get that critique. And what else do we got? I hated the Chancellor's son in Numenor. All the politics in Numenor I didn't enjoy. Galadriel jumping off the boat before they got into Valinor, and she's just out in the middle of the ocean and luckily comes across a ship. I thought that was a little goofy, too. Just out in the depths of the ocean and gets discovered by a random board of people.
And Sauron.
And Sauron, yes, because of course he was out there. Like, why the hell wouldn't he have been out there right then? When you put it like that. And then my last thing was one of the cool things we just talked about, the pyroclastic flow from the volcano. It swallows the entire village. It swallows Galadriel. And those clouds are like 2,000 to 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. So they all would have just been melted to the skeleton. Like, they would have just been fried instantly. So the fact that whole pyroclastic flow swept over them all, and then they're all alive, and the next season just covered in, or the next episode just covered in ash. That part, I was like, I mean, that's blatant. You would die. You would be dead. But
right.
Yeah.
And Galadriel was like standing way out in front. She didn't even move the whole time. She just stood there and took
the brunt of it. Like,
you could see flames too when it hit her. It wasn't just smoke.
It wasn't just smoke. That's when you know, like, oh, that's thousands of degrees right there that they just survived. But
she's an elf.
Yeah, I guess the rest of them ain't, but they survived too. So, all right. So, watching it again, I'm gonna pull up our ratings here because, as I said, we had this rated pretty high. We really did. So, pulling up the ratings here, as a whole, I had it rated at a 8.9. JD had it rated as an 8.9, and you had it rated as a 9.1 for the season. Would you say you'd stand by your rating, or would you change it at all after your rewatch?
I might drop it down to an 8.9, but it's good where it is, I think.
Okay.
Same thing, right?
All right.
9.1, 8.9.
So it's still solid. There you go.
It's solid.
That's what you like to see. Okay. It's tough for me to say because I still have to watch the last 2 episodes, which are pretty crucial. But as of now, watching the first 6 episodes, my thought is maybe I drop it to like an 8.8, maybe from an 8.9. But I still feel pretty good at where I rated it to. I don't think it's necessarily above a 9, but it's as close as you could get. So I was very satisfied with it. Before we jump into season 2 expectations, we had a matchup. You know what? Actually, we'll hold off. Season 2. So we got a trailer. We talked about it already. But there was a couple key points that popped up. We won't repeat ourselves too much. But it looks good. We're stoked for it. It's coming out any day now, depending on when you're listening to this. But it's dropping soon. Fall, August, baby. It's here, baby.
29th.
So one of the cool things we're going to see is there's a big storyline in the Silmarillion between Annatar and Celebrimbor, which we talked about earlier. Annatar is Sauron in his elven form. The word means Lord of Gifts. And he claimed that he was sent from the Valar to share his wisdom and skills in ringcraft and jewelry for the benefit of all Middle-earth. And they all bought it. Celebrimbor loved and welcomed him with open arms. They took his information and his knowledge, and they started creating the Rings of Power. And during the forging of the rings, Celebrimbor began to get a suspicion that Annatar was not quite who he said he was. So he began to craft the 3 for the elves in secret, which kind of happens in Season 1. The 3 elf rings are kept protected because Halbrand gets exposed before he gets his hands on them. But after he crafts those in secret. Sauron would later down the road find out and seek those 3 for himself, becoming obsessed with finding them. And this line of the story leads to another event that was kind of teased in the trailer, and that is the Siege of Eregion. So Eregion is the city that the dwarves just helped the elves create. Like, they started building, and they were cooperating in season 1. They built this beautiful area, and we get a glimpse of this in the trailer where it looks like there's massive forces attacking the city. And in the Silmarillion, this was a massive battle between the Elvish city and the forces of Sauron. I think it was like 100,000 strong. It was a crazy battle, and this battle would mark the beginning of the war between the elves and Sauron, which covered the Second Age. So we could expect like some Game of Thrones level of craziness when it comes to these types of battles. Maybe the trilogy level. I don't want to say that, though. That's a high bar. But I think we could get some insanely epic scenes that we didn't see out of season 1 coming in here in season 2.
Yeah, because there was no giant battle in season 1. That's the thing they didn't do yet. I mean, the Númenórean attack was as big as they got, but there was still not a very wide-scale battle.
Right. Yeah, so I think this could be awesome. And we saw other stuff in the trailer. There's a big troll, which hilariously they say is inspired by Mike from Breaking Bad. If you've seen that show, I guess his look, which I don't know if that's an honor or an insult to the actor, but fair enough.
Interesting.
Yeah, a little odd. But then there's another thing that popped up in some shots that came out of Empire exclusive, and that is something called Barrow-wights. That are these evil spirits that is causing more change, uproar, because in the original lore, the Barrow-wights didn't show up until the Witch King of Angmar sent them out to keep the Dunedain from resettling the region. So they came about after the Nazgul were created, well after the rings were created. So them popping up now, people are kind of throwing little fits. But we saw some images of Galadriel fighting them. But they're pretty creepy. They're definitely like almost Dementor type beings. They're in the books initially, like Frodo and the hobbits get captured by them in these what is it called? The Barrow Downs. That's why they're called Barrow-wights. The Barrow Downs, and that's where they find those elvish swords that they end up having in the movie. So they play a role in the books and stuff, but I don't think there's such a big deal that it's like you should be worried that they're bringing them in earlier. So we're going to get some of that in the show. I don't know. There's some cool stuff coming. So my question to you, do you think this season will be better or worse than season 1?
I'm going to say better.
Okay.
I mean, I think because they set things up so well in season 1 to where things are just moving forward now, and with Sauron as an elf, I'm really excited to see how he pulls that off. And do you think people are going to recognize him right away? Like, hey, you have the same face, but you look different? Or you think he's going to get away with it?
Yeah, I don't know, because I don't know where he's showing up disguised as this. But I swear, if he's talking to Celebrimbor in this new disguise, I'm going to be a little disappointed. Like, hey, I don't know who you are. You look new. Welcome. Yeah, I don't know, but I'm interested is the big thing. I'm very interested to see where they're going with this. So I'm hoping that it exceeds season 1 as well. Like you said, I think there's more opportunity for it to be epic and on another level of this budget that they're using. So, I think it'll be solid. The other question I have on it, last year we had a matchup between House of the Dragon and Rings of Power, and we rated them because they came out at the same time. So we do all right, who won this week? Who won this week? And believe it or not, House of the Dragon only won week 1 and week 6 of the matchups when they had similar episodes. And that's only because Rings of Power week 6 was episode 7. If it was episode 6, Rings of Power probably would have taken that. But anyway, when it came down to it all, we all voted Rings of Power over House of the Dragon season 1, which is pretty crazy. I don't know. After rewatching House of the Dragon season 1, I don't know if I'd keep that or not. That's tough. But what do you think? Do you think season 2 of both shows, who do you think comes out on top this year?
That's hard to say because House of the Dragon's been on fire. I'm going to say they're both going to be the same. No, I'm going to give it, I think I might have to give it to, I'm going to say Rings. I'm going to go with Rings of Power.
Wow. Wow. Okay. So, do you think House of? Oh no, sorry. We won't get into that. I was going to start comparing the season to House of the Dragon. I won't do that to you, Andy. I think House of the Dragon might take this one. It was very close for me last year. Very, very close. But I think House of the Dragon might take it. But we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see. Yeah. See how it goes. Real quick before we head out of here, we'll talk about a couple of Lord of the Rings things coming out here soon. So we have the Hunt for Gollum, which was a new movie coming out. It's going to be directed by Andy Serkis. We've talked about this a lot, but he'll be directing and starring in it. Original trilogy writers are returning to help build the story. We don't know much other than that, other than it'll take place during the events of the Fellowship of the Ring.
And Peter Jackson is producing it, right?
Oh yeah, I think he is EP. I don't know if he's the main producer, but yeah, he'll be working on it too.
Okay.
But yeah, during Bilbo's party in the Fellowship, he gives Gandalf the ring, or he drops it on the doorstep, and Frodo picks it up, and then Gandalf starts getting suspicious about it, and he dips, and then he comes back, and he's like, "Is it secret? Is it safe?" What's not common knowledge is in the books there was 17 years between those two scenes. Gandalf was gone for 17 years researching the ring and all that stuff before he came back knowing what it was and told Frodo to get ready, you need to leave. So it was a long time.
He's tempted by the ring and he's like staring at it, and when Frodo walks in he's like, "Precious, my precious," when he says that.
Yeah, but I think he said that after he studied it and everything, and then it came back. But so the night of the party, remember the ring's on the floor, and Frodo picks it up, and Gandalf tells him to keep it secret. No, but yeah, he does. He gets his suspicions. I don't remember when he said the precious thing, but something happens where he gets his suspicions, and he goes, "All right, I need to ride." And he rides to Minas Tirith, and he starts reading all these and studying these things. It was 17 years until he got back and started telling Frodo, "You need to leave." And then the oh gosh, I don't know why I can't think. The Nazgul shows up on horseback chasing after. It was a long time. So that's when this movie is taking place during. There was stuff going on with Aragorn hunting Gollum during those times for Gandalf to get information. There was a lot of stuff. So that's when this time is going to take place. But they've talked to Ian McKellen, Viggo Mortensen, now most recently Elijah Wood about returning. And Elijah Wood's the only one who could come back and not have to be de-aged because he doesn't age anyways. But I don't see how Viggo can return, man. I don't know. I don't see that working.
I still have another question. Was it in the movie? It's not 17 years though, right?
They don't specify how long it is in the movie.
But no, it's been like a day, it seems like, right?
I know. It seems like it's the next day, but they skip forward and stuff, so they never actually officially address how long it was in the movie. Yeah. Because,
Hobbits don't age fast?
It's not immediately, though, because when Frodo sees Bilbo in Rivendell, they act like it's been a long time since they've seen each other, and Bilbo has aged quite a bit. He's got white hair and everything. So and Bilbo left that night, so it was a decent. It wasn't a day, that's for sure. But they just never specified in the movie.
But does he age quick because he doesn't have the ring anymore?
Yeah, well, I think he starts aging normally as soon as he gives the ring off. Now aging kicks in, and so 10 years later, I don't know. Again, I don't know how long it was, but yeah. So, but in the book, 17 years. So that's when this will take place. But I don't know. I don't know what to expect for this, but And then, speaking of not knowing what to expect, we have The War of the Rohirrim. This is an animated movie coming out this year. I drafted it for our box office draft. Warner Bros. Showed 20 minutes of footage to an animation festival where it received thunderous applause. And I got people hyped up, apparently. But the new story is set nearly 200 years before Bilbo Baggins comes in contact with the ring. It centers on the House of Helm Hammerhand, the King of Rohan, voiced by Brian Cox, with the focus on his daughter, the strong-willed Princess Hera, voiced by Gaia Wise. In the clip, a dispute erupts during a council meeting, leaving Wolf a ruthless, Dunlending lord seeking vengeance. Miranda Otto reprises her Lord of the Rings role as Éowyn, this time as the movie's narrator. So, I have no idea what to expect from this, but I don't think it's going to do very well in the box office. Love, do you have any expectations for this?
No, I don't. I probably won't see it in theaters either, just because of the animation style. It doesn't look like my go-to.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I was hoping it would just be less. It's kind of anime style, huh?
It is very much so anime style. Yeah, the studio who does it is very set in the Japanese anime kind of culture. Yeah. Yeah, I probably won't get tickets to it either. It isn't the first animated Lord of the Rings project. They had The Hobbit, 1977 animated movie, and they had Lord of the Rings movies animated. And the Hobbit one was wild. It was like kind of part fever dream, part epic animation. Some of the art is so odd. Like the elves are these like blue wrinkly people with these very interesting accents. But one thing that holds up is the score. There's a few scenes that I was watching the other night on YouTube, and the score was bringing the heat. So, but it's pretty weird. I don't know if you've seen any of them before, but
no, I have not.
Yeah, they're old and weird. But I watched them as a kid, so there's a little nostalgia there. But yeah, I think that wraps it up for us here with the Rings of Power Season 2 coverage. Good old Lord of the Rings session here. Thank you to Andy for letting us grace his studio and for letting us plug our show. So again, as Lub said, we are the Why So Sidious podcast. Why So Sidious, a nerd podcast. And you can find us on Instagram, TikTok, and X at Why So Sidious Pod. We are on YouTube. We are dropping episodes constantly. We're covering The Boys, we're covering The Acolyte, we're covering House of the Dragon on there. So if you are a big fan of House of the Dragon, you listen to the Galactic Core podcast, come on over. We'll have you over there. We cover the show. We love it. And yeah, just go ahead and check us out. Shoot us a subscribe. Shoot us a follow. And thank you for joining us here. As always, we will see you next time on the Galactic Core podcast.
Thanks for tuning in to the Galactic Core Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. But until next time, go get your geek on.